Forensic investigators of Reddit, what are some of the most disturbing and horrific cases you've worked on? Had a paranoid schizophrenic male who forced his elderly mother to eat rocks, and I mean a shitload of rocks, to the point where she died. He told police that he was feeding her rocks to weigh her down so God couldn't take her yet. Jesus. Reminds me of a case in the funeral home I worked in. An adult son died from an overdose in his room. Caused his mother to snap. One of her children came over unaware of what happened. Noticed a smell in the house. The mother explained that he was going to wake up like Jesus did. The daughter called 911 and fled the house. She barricaded herself in the house for 5 more days with the body. Recently read a story about a lady's boyfriend who beat her 3-year-old son constantly, then finally to death after he defecated on the carpet. He wasn't being fed and was eating out of the garbage. The mother said she slapped him to wake up and stop pretending he was dead like he usually does after a beating. Once she realized he was dead, she gave him a bath, went to put on her makeup and wig, then began to read the Bible to him, before taking him to the hospital. Okay, this dates back many years to my time as a US Army SID criminal investigator. I was working a fraud case against a soldier, whom I'll call Sturgis, who had been collecting housing allowance, but actually living in his car. Total was about $11,000, so it's not like he was looking at prison time or anything. Worst case scenario was a dishonorable discharge. But his company XO made a hobby out of making this guy's life miserable while the investigation was going on. He personally escorted the guy to all his meetings with me, the JAG office, and other than that he was basically on full lockdown. One day they had an extended field exercise, still on base, but sleeping in tents for a few days and doing, I don't know, infantry stuff. When they got back to the company grounds, everyone lined up at the arms room turn in their M16s and other various weaponry, but Sturgis instead walked out into the middle of the parade ground and sat down. The XO came out after him, yelling all the way about what a world of shit he was going to rain down on him. Sturgis stood up and shot him full auto with ammo he'd pocketed from the range. Stitched him from groin to neck. Then Sturgis sat back down and put the muzzle to his eye socket and held the trigger down for as long as he could. Once the duty agent who got the call put together who the cast of characters was, he called me since I had the existing case file. When I got there the XO's body was gone, they'd taken him to the ER but DOA. Sturgis they didn't bother with since his head looked like a deflated basketball. Turned out that the bullets from his rifle went right through his brain and shattered the top of his skull, and the muzzle gas pushed his brain completely out of his skull. One perfect hemisphere was laying next to him, the other a surprisingly long distance away and had landed in an anthill and was crawling with ants. I used a tongue depressor to roll the loose parts of Sturgis into a plastic bag. His autopsy was the next day, and I attended to take photographs, for the file, not a personal thing. That was almost 30 years ago, and I can still hear the medical examiner say, "Ugh, there's fucking ANTS all over this thing." Like, sorry dude, was that the thing that made this job too real for you? Worked a case involving 2 young sisters, 8 and 4, it was actually 13 and 6, if I recall. This was 20 years ago, and their meth head mom and her boyfriend. Mom was convinced her girls were possessed by demons, so she forced them to take baths in bleach. When that didn't work, she started making them drink bleach. The older girl knew enough to immediately throw up the bleach, and she would drag her sister behind the couches or wherever they could in the house to throw it up. Eventually the little daughter couldn't throw it up anymore and died. She then froze the little sister, and proceeded to hack the frozen body into pieces in front of the older sister, and then disposed of the pieces somehow. We were sent in to see if we could find the body. Walking into that house, the smell of bleach was overwhelming, and I can still remember all the bleach stains on the carpet. Edit, for those asking about the sentence, here is a link to the story. Changed age of girls from 8 and 4 to 13 and 6. Back in my forensic anthropology student days, we worked on an unknown, unclaimed skeleton for class. We'd analyze these skeletons for class as part of our weekly projects. The story goes this: Jane Doe was new in town but made some fast acquaintances at a local bar. Jane Doe and her 3 new friends get the bright idea to go rob the local motorcycle gang. The gang has a house in town, but they're not there right now. Just a couple of their old ladies. So these 4 brain surgeons come up with a plan. Jane Doe and another woman will go up to the door in a panic. They'll bang on the door and scream for help. The 2 guys would wait in the bushes and spring out once the door is opened. Then they could rob the house. So with plan in hand, they get to the house. Jane Doe and the lady run up and start banging on the door, screaming bloody murder about someone bring after them. Inside are 2 of the gang's girlfriends/wives. They figure something is up. One gets a shotgun, one gets on the phone and dials 911. The women outside are banging so hard on the door it begins to break and come apart. Lady with the shotgun is scared and has it pointed at the door. The door breaks open and Jane Doe is the first through the door. Shotgun lady lets both barrels rip and deletes Jane Doe's face from eyebrows to chin. This was back in the 90s. I wonder if they ever figured out who she was. Rookie police officer here. It was my first full year on the streets and morning roll call just broke and I got into my patrol car and started to get myself situated for the day when a call comes over the radio for a person with a weapon, which is a fairly common call in my area of patrol, so you never really know what you're gonna get. So I get to the address that radio gave me and get out of my car and start going towards the property where the call came from when another patrol car shows up and meets me at the door, but it's locked. So we start knocking very loud and hear a young woman crying and screaming, and she eventually opens the door and shouts upstairs 3rd floor, and points up the stairs. So we don't have any information whether it's a gun/knife/bat or anything, so we draw our firearms and start up the stairs. I was the first inside the 3rd floor and all the lights were out and it was still dark outside, so I draw my flashlight and start making my way around bends and turns of that floor when I see some lady sitting in the couch, and I say, "Mom, where is he at?" As I cross in front of her with my flashlight and clearing the rest of the room when the cop behind me put his light on the lady and sees she has a 12 knife in the center of her chest. Turns out the woman was smoking PCP the night before and stabbed herself in the chest. What's weird about it was that she was sitting upright with her eyes open and her head straight. Then we looked at the floor and it was covered in blood. So after stabbing herself square in the chest, she walked around a little bit before sitting down on the couch and passing away. Stay away from drugs. I'm still fresh in the field and don't have any super horrific stories, but I interned with a police department while working towards my master's. I went to a scene with a deceased adult male. Suspected overdose and very recent, he was dead for around 8 hours, ick. Nothing gruesome, but his parents found him. They were crying in the next room as an officer spoke with them. At some point we went into the deceased's bedroom, which he shared with his toddler, and I distinctly remember seeing all the toys on the floor and how they were the same ones my little cousins had. I started getting a bit emotional, but then we found bags of powder hidden in the child's clothing drawer. At the university, I took a medico-legal investigation course that was taught by a medical examiner. Lots of case photos, but the one I remember was of a suicide bomber. The explosives he had wrapped around himself exploded downwards. Everything below the waist was either gone or a tangled mess, but his top half looked completely untouched. I also did a mock reconstruction report for the 1970 MacDonald murders. I had access to scene and autopsy photos, including those of the children. These were almost 50-year-old pictures, so the quality was not the greatest, but I don't think I'll forget them for a long time. It may seem like plagiarism or repost, but I had already answered a similar question. Since English is not my first language and I am working, I felt it was easier just to copy my previous post. Sorry for any inconvenience. I worked in Xi in Mexico. Once we went to a safe house where the police found 14 people who were tortured and executed. You could smell the iron from the entrance. Upon entering there were two women with broomsticks taped to the anus and the vagina. In the upstairs bathroom they found a woman tied to the toilet, died of dehydration, had urinated and defecated on her for days. It was evident that they also raped her and beat her before turning her into a toilet. One of the rooms had 5 shackles on the wall and in the center a metal bucket with water. The 5 people died of hunger and from beatings. The sickest was in the backyard. In a warehouse without windows there were several bodies that had their faces and hands removed. It was like watching a horror movie, but that's the narco in these places, excuse my bad English. Digital forensics here. I had to sit through a film of a blindfolded, screaming 8-year-old girl being abused every way you can image by 2 overweight Russian men. The film lasted about 3 hours, and the abuse would have caused her permanent injury. The denouement was where the bag was taken off her head and a gun was presented to her face. If you've never seen a small child suddenly realize their own mortality, then I suggest you never do. One of them pulled the trigger and her head disintegrated in a shower of red mist and brains. The other held up a newspaper which was to show the date. The film had been commissioned by someone else who wanted this to happen, presumably so he could jerk off to it. Humanity is fucked. Children's Protective Services worker here. We do forensic interviewing during our investigation, so I'm counting myself in. I watched the autopsy of a 2-month-old infant with suspected cause of asphyxiation from regurgitating too much milk from being overfed. Turned into a homicide as they peeled back the infant's scalp to reveal a massive skull fracture and brain bleed from sharp blunt force trauma. To a 2-month-old. My daughter, adopted, was 2 weeks old, 6 pounds, when her bio dad fractured her skull and caused her brain bleed. Also hung her out the window by her leg. Then squeezed her, breaking her arm. Piece of shit human. No hell worse enough for these people. Anyway, she is a warrior and miracle. Some developmental delays but otherwise perfect. Edited, my mom brain doesn't work so well. I actually was just looking for info to find out what he actually served. To be honest, I only attended the first hearing because that was the only one directly related to the baby. As far as visitation issues cause, it can happen, believe it or not, so I want to say he was up for 5 felony assault charges. He had also abused her 11-year-old half-brother repeatedly. Have not found the results yet, all I know is he did go away. But I have to correct some of my info. I confused her age with how long she was in hospital. She was 4 weeks old, spent 2 weeks in hospital. But she was only 6 pounds when I got her because she was a little preemie. I have never held a child that tiny, my bios were plumper lumps. Also, he didn't break her arm. He broke femur and tibia in one leg, and femur in other leg. And 3 ribs. How could I possibly forget that? Well, I was really only focused on the brain bleed at that time. And I've had lots of kids, and mom brain for 30 years, so. Basically he was beating the mom, her 11-year-old tried to defend her, happened a lot, so he got beat him, took my baby, and hung her out the window threatening to drop her, then shook and squeezed her so bad she broke. Thankfully their bones are a little rubbery at that age but not the brain. She was having seizures for 2 freaking days before they brought her to hospital. I'm sure to hopefully not have to disclose it. Her mom wasn't an abuser. But she lost her because she couldn't/wouldn't leave the men in her life that repeatedly abused her and her children. She had a lifetime of abuse and I guess thought it was pretty normal. She did love her, but was too sick and weak. On a side note, before the adoption took place at 2 years old, she already had a new man and baby. Jumped right in after evil man went to jail. She just couldn't be alone. I'm still searching for how long he ended up getting in jail. Thank you all for the support. My daughter just turned 13, she is the happiest person I know. Wakes every day with a smile. Intellectually she is behind, but she is very creative, loves music and dance, camping, devoted friend, and is very excited that she got her ears pierced last weekend, and that she is a teenager. She is an incredible support to her brother, also adopted, who has, God help me, so many other issues, not physical, emotional, but that's a whole other longer post. My adult bios were challenged by adding a couple more but adore them and really support me. It's been rough. I've had many traumatic issues in the last 10 years, which has been very hard to recover from. But we're a little team. We actually took on a year-long RV adventure to move to our new area. My 2 dogs, and 2 kitties, just roaming for a year along the East Coast. It was fabulous, highly recommend. That's all for now. Thank you. Grandmother prostituting her deaf grandson. QRT squad went in hard, but at minimum close to 3 dozen unique samples of individuals were found in just the kids' room. I was in Narcotics at the time following up on some shit that lead to this. This lead me to decide I could no longer police as I would have ended up killing someone at some point. Which if it weren't for my own kid in my life, I'm not sure anything would have pulled me away. 8 months overseas guarding food trucks and watching supply lines got me hooked in with a supply chain company back stateside. Every once in a while someone who finds out I was a cop says, oh, I can see that. No time can put that me away. No time can solve the possibility that my wires would have burnt and I would have been a bad guy too. Edit, response team went in fast due to possibility of men in house. Ravaged probably quite a bit of evidence. How these people meet and find each other I will never understand. Hubby and I were both volunteer EMTs. My worst call was a couple who were on their way to celebrate their first anniversary. There was a bad storm and they hydroplaned under a semi, whose back wheels ran up over the passenger side of the car. Killed the wife instantly. She was smashed down into her husband's lap. My ambulance transported the husband, who only had a broken arm. We aren't allowed to tell passengers if someone died, so I had to spend the whole trip to the hospital reassuring him that the other ambulance would be doing their very best for her, while knowing she was DOA. He was talking about how it was their first anniversary and she was 3 months pregnant. I totally checked out after that call and only lasted another month or so. I was still in the ed doing paperwork when he got the news and that wail of grief still haunts me. Not crime scene investigator, but in uni I did crime and investigation and part of it was reviewing old cases. We were lucky enough to have a talk from the lead investigator on the Myra Hindley and Ian Brady case. During the talk we got to review the official crime scene photos, including ones that as far as I'm aware the press nor family had ever seen. On the way in we had anything that we could use to take a photo taken off us to prevent any being leaked online. One was a photo of a half skeleton and half human as the soil had fully preserved one side of the body. Even though it was just pictures, they are images I wish I'd never have seen, along with some of the sick stories you heard about what people had done. It made me never do anything with my degree. A model house for a new subdivision was busy with 4 people, 3 women and 1 man, running sales. So the model house was the first on the street with signs everywhere saying come on in, etc., and people could tour model home, then possibly sign up to build a house in the subdivision. A local well-known drifter had been watching the house for the days. Ended up taking all 4 hostage. Raped several of the women and killed them all with blunt force trauma. He had entered with an old gun, but that didn't stop him from making things awful for these people's deaths. Ultimately the man was taken down by a SWAT team after a solid day standoff. The case was kinda high profile, so they moved the trial 3 hours away. I had seen lots of terrible things in my time at this DA's office, but this crime was particularly brutal and upsetting. Apparently he had been watching the model house because of one woman in particular he was basically stalking. He had been regarded as a harmless man, usually just looking for some change around town, but the cruelty and brutality he exhibited that day was haunting. I was working a case of what was thought to be a B&D, and the homeowner killed them in self-defense. The person killed was a 16-year-old boy. The case was about to be shut, but the lead said to have the body examined for other trauma. Then found semen in the boy's rectum, and a few days later a neighbor sent in a video from a Ring doorbell, showing the man dragging a body. The boy had been raped and then killed, then dragged into his house to make it look like he was acting in self-defense. His brother then committed suicide around 2 weeks later. And the mom had to be taken to a mental institute as she was suicidal as well. The most disturbing case I ever worked was 5 years ago in Manhattan. The cadaver of a homeless man was brought in. He had been stabbed 254 times by implements of varying size. I found small burns in various places, his eyes had been gouged out, violently, and there was a cue ball in his mouth with teeth behind it. His penis had also been removed, and inserted into his anus using some wooden implement. To me, it seemed like a group of sick people picked someone no one would care about and decided to do terrible things to them just for the fun of it. Police came to the same conclusion and never made any leads as far as I know. That one kept me up for a couple weeks. Just knowing there were people out there in my city who could do something like that for no obvious reason other than entertainment, and they got away with it, gives me chills. My dad used to be a hero driver. It's the people that help you when you have a flat tire and stuff like that. Sometimes they are at accident scenes. So my dad was the first at a scene of a woman who was driving the wrong way on the highway who hit someone in a head-on collision, causing her to fly out of the windshield to end up ran over and trampled by cars. Her jaw looked so broken that her lower face was flat and her eyes were wide open. I wasn't even there but I cringed at the description.
Sorrowful happiness that I just can't seem to guide.